What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Overwatch League discussion video, and today we're talking about the San Francisco Shock because I've noticed that a lot of people believe that they will be a really good team in this upcoming season. So I thought I'd give my thoughts on how good I think the San Francisco Shock is, and I think the best way to approach this is by analyzing what their team is looking like. And before I get into all of the players on the Shock's roster, because that's going to be the main attraction of this video, I want to first start off by mentioning the head coach of the Shock, who goes by the name of Krusty. We all know and love him. He was on the Uprising for the first 3 stages, and of course in Stage 3 we saw Boston go 10-0. They're the only team to do that in Overwatch League Season 1, and a lot of people didn't expect the Uprising to be a very good team at the beginning of the season, so it's clear that he was a big-time difference maker as to why this team was so good. And I truly believe that having good coaches can really determine how good a team will end up being. Just look at teams like the NYXL and the LA Valley and all the top dogs in Season 1 of the Overwatch League. They had really solid head coaches, and I think that the Shock will have an advantage coming into this season because they have a guy like Krusty on their squad. Okay, let's talk players now, shall we? And oh man, this team is so stacked. They are absolutely loaded with talented players, and I guess we'll start things off by talking about the main tank position. We know that their starter will most likely be Super. I like Super a lot. We all know and love the guy, I'm pretty sure. He's a very good communicator, very solid leader, very smart player, and I think that he didn't play quite as well as some people thought he would in Season 1 is simply because he just didn't get enough experience. He wasn't old enough right from the start of the year, so he had to sit out for a while, kind of like Sinatra and Architect, but when he did play, I thought that he definitely was a difference maker on the Shock. He played better than Nomi did for sure. And I think that if he did play more games, then he'd look even better by the end of Stage 4 for sure. But coming into Season 2, he's got more experience now. He's been grinding. I guarantee you he will be a very good player and a consistent contributor for the Shock. They also have a man who goes by the name of Smurf. He's also a really good player. If you don't know much about Smurf, just know that he played in Contenders last season on the GG Esports Academy team, and then he ended up being acquired by the Outlaws during the offseason, and then eventually traded to the Shock for Dante. And while I don't think that Smurf is as good as Super, I definitely think he's a really solid backup, and if something were to happen to Super, like maybe he got hurt or sick, whatever the reason may be that he can't play, Smurf would make for a really solid replacement. Again, I don't think he's as good as Super, but I think he could probably get the job done, especially if the rest of the team pulls their own weight. Needless to say, though, the San Francisco Shock have themselves a good pair of main tanks. Moving on to the off-tank spot, I think that they have 2 really solid and consistent players in Choyobin. I think that's how you say it. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. And also they have Nevix. I like both of these guys a lot. It's hard for me to decide which one is better. I guess I'd go with Choyobin by a small margin, but I think they're just about even in terms of skill level. And like I was saying, they're very consistent D.Va players. I don't really know how flexible they are, but D.Va is like a staple in most comps these days anyway, so I don't think that's much of a problem. They are both amazing at the hero. I expect Choyobin to get the starting role in this upcoming season. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Nevix sneaks his way into the lineup at times and gets some play time just because I think he's that good. But with the way things were going at the end of last season, I expect Choyobin to be the starter. But kind of like with the main tank position, I think they are very stacked at off tank as well. Now I want to talk about the support position, more specifically flex support, because oh my god, I love Sleepy. Let me just talk about this guy real quick. I think he's slightly underrated, not by much, but I think people just don't talk about him enough. And I say that because he's a really good Zen and Ana player. I think of him kind of like a mini Jonek because he's not quite as good as him, but he shows a lot of the Jonek flashes within him with his Zenyatta and Ana plays. And it makes sense because he kind of idolizes Jonek. He studies him all the time. And maybe with enough practice, one day he'll get to around Jonek's level. I think that now that he has experience under his belt, he will be a threat in this upcoming season. He will be dangerous. Mark my words, I guarantee you that. But that's not all. They also have another bloodthirsty Zenyatta on their team who goes by the name of Violet. He comes from O2 Ordeon. I don't know exactly how you pronounce that, but he comes from the O2 Overwatch Korean Contenders team. And just look at some highlights of him. He's pretty darn good at Zen. I don't know how good he is on some of the other heroes because I just haven't looked at enough gameplay of the guy, but I know for certain that he is really good at Zenyatta. I don't know how much time on stage Violet will get just because Sleepy is really good, but I think if he ever did get some playtime, he would do pretty well. Up next at main support, they actually only have one player, and it's Moth. I think that Moth is okay. I don't think that he's like top tier or anything, but I definitely don't think he deserves to be called a bottom tier main support either. I think he played well at times on the Shock and on the World Cup team this year for the USA. I think that overall he's a really good shot caller. He's a decent leader as well, but I just don't think that he's all that good, unfortunately. Don't get me wrong though. Even though I don't think Moth is all that good, he can get the job done. We've seen him do it in the past, and I expect him to have a good game here and there in Season 2, but I also expect him to have some pretty mediocre and below average games as well. That's enough about the supports though. Let's move on to the DPS now, because this is by far their most loaded spot, if you ask me. They have Striker. They just acquired him from the Boston Uprising. He's a fantastic Tracer player. He's an underrated Widowmaker in my opinion. He can play Junkrat. I'm sure that with enough practice he could get good at the other projectiles too. They also have Sinatra, another good Tracer player. He's also a really good Zarya. Then they have Baby Bay, a fantastic hit scan who can play McCree, Widow, Soldier, whatever the heck you need. They also recently acquired Rascal, who's just a really good flex DPS in my opinion. He's not one of the best, but I still think he is pretty solid overall. And then last but certainly not least, they have Architect, who again is another one of those flexible guys. He can play hit scan well, like Widow for an example, but I think he shines the most on heroes like Pharah and Genji. He's really good at that projectile role too. I really do like all of these guys a lot, and they all bring specific strengths to the table, but unfortunately I think that San Francisco just has way too many DPS players on this team. They could easily get rid of someone like Baby Bay and then pick up another main support player, you know? And no offense to Baby Bay, I love the guy a lot. Maybe he's on the team for his leadership at this point, but I think that Striker could pretty much do anything he could, but even better. I've never seen Striker really pick up McCree before, but I'm sure if Krusty asked him to, then he'd play McCree, grind him out hard, and be better than Baby Bay ever was. I just think that Striker is a more talented player. He has more superstar potential. It's just how it is. And then also, though, another problem I have is they have two really good Tracers now. They have Sinatra and Striker. And Sinatra can't really play much else. I mean, he can play Reinhardt and Hammond and Zarya. That's one thing he definitely has over Striker. He's a better Zarya player. But I just don't know. I mean, in a GOATS meta, yeah, Sinatra would probably be better than Striker, but I think that the Overwatch League is kind of transitioning away from that. I don't think we're going to see as much GOATS because they've been underpowering heroes like Brigitte lately. So I just don't know if having 5 DPS players is the right move. I definitely look to get rid of at least one. Perhaps they could make it work though. I'm not exactly sure how. Maybe they'll have certain players play on specific maps, or maybe they'll ride the hot hand of whoever's doing well during scrims and practice or whatever else. I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do, but if they do manage to work things out, then they could be kind of scary on DPS because, like I said, they have a lot of high-end talent there. So I'm interested to see what the Shock will do with all of these DPS players for sure. Okay, now that I've discussed all of the players on the team and the coach, I want to give my verdict on to how good I think the San Francisco Shock truly are. So to be honest, I think that some people are overrating them. A lot of people think they could easily be like a top 5 team. They could be the best team in LA too, which I think is kind of ridiculous because even though the Valiant lost Soon and the Gladiators lost Fissure, I still think they're both a little better than the Shock. But who knows? I could be wrong. But overall, even though I don't think the Shock are the best team in California, I definitely think that they will make the playoffs for sure. I expect them to make a top 8 finish. Perhaps they'll do even better. I'm not exactly sure what their ceiling is, but I don't foresee them missing the playoffs at the very least. When you consider all of the really talented pieces that the San Francisco Shock possess, whether it's their head coach or their players, this team looks pretty good on paper. Like, I definitely think they could be one of the best teams in the league, but I have my doubts, unfortunately, because I think they just have an oversaturation of good players. And I know that may sound absolutely ridiculous because it's never a bad thing to have roster depth, especially when it's filled with really talented guys like the people on the Shock. But hear me out on this. when you have all of these good players, they tend to compete for playtime, right? And that means that there's a good chance you will be shuffling around who's in your lineup. And if you're always doing that all the time, it could be hard to build synergy. I mean, I'm not saying that this could definitely happen, but there's a possibility that they will have these issues. And when you look at all of the playoff teams, look at the Spitfire who won the championship, the Fusion, LA Valiant, all of these guys, they tended to run with just 6 players. They never really subbed anyone in, and because they did this, they had really good chemistry with each other. There was never a man that they weren't used to having in the game. It was always the same 6 guys. I know that the NYXL are kind of an exception to this. They ran Janice, Pine, and also Animo off of the bench, but that's only 3 players. The Shock have so many DPS players. They also have 2 really good off tanks. It's going to be really tough for them to make a consistent starting lineup when you have all of these great pieces, right? And no, I'm not going to sit here and say it's impossible for the Shock to figure that out. I don't want anyone to believe that. San Francisco could very well figure out a really solid system that works for them, that doesn't really ruin their chemistry in any way, while maintaining good playtime for most of the players on the roster. So we'll just have to watch and see, I guess, but I do firmly believe the Shock will be a top 8 team regardless, and they will make the playoffs. And with that being said, I'm ready to wrap up the video. So if you enjoyed today's content, make sure to hit that like button. I'd very much appreciate it. If you're new around here, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon so you don't miss when my next video goes up. And feel free to let me know what you think of the San Francisco Shock down in the comments section. And until next time, this is ATP signing out. Peace.